We're going to be moving rapidly on from yesterday into the next. So we've now completed the Khulafa Rashidun period, and we've spent more time on that because obviously, as we said in the beginning, there is quite uh, a lot of religious significance for us as Muslims, even though it's a very short period, just 30 years, compared to the rest of the over 1,400 years that we're looking at. It's of intense significance. So therefore, that's why it's more time spent on that. Just to finish off, obviously yesterday we finished when Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu was shaheed by the Khariji assassin. After that, what happened was the people of Kufa, Sayyidina Ali had moved the capital of the Islamic Caliphate from Medina to Kufa, because once some fighting started amongst the Muslims, he didn't want fighting to happen in Medina. He didn't want bloodshed and these fitna to come into Medina. So that's why he moved to Kufa, the capital of the Caliphate. So the people of Kufa, then they took bay'ah with Sayyidina Al-Hasan radiallahu anhu, who obviously he's the son of Ali and Fatima and the grandson of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Al-Hasan anhu. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there's a famous hadith, Sahih hadith, that one time the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was amongst some Sahaba, and Sayyidina Al-Hasan was a small boy, just playing around. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "This son of mine is a great leader, great chief. And may Allah make peace, or Allah will make peace between two group of Muslims through him." So when Sayyidina Al-Hasan is now become the Khalifa, the side of Muawiyah and the Shami people, they still refusing to recognize him as the Khalifa. So Sayyidina Al-Hasan, he done an amazing thing. Once again, these are very rare people in history that we see. Remember we were saying yesterday, and historically, if you look at the history of most of the world, the empires, the kingdoms, people, they fight tooth and nail to keep to power. They will kill their own families to get into power. And very, very rarely you'll find someone of this caliber of person like Sayyidina Al-Hasan, that he said, look, to prevent fighting between the Muslims, I'm going to give the leadership to Muawiyah. So he gave Muawiyah the caliphate of all the Muslims, which is an amazing, very, very rare individuals like that. Because obviously he had every right and he had every support. Apart from the Shami people that were behind Muawiyah, they were quite fanatic supporters of Muawiyah. Sayyidina Al-Hasan is a grandson of the Prophet ﷺ. Who is going to be more beloved to the people than the grandson of the Prophet ﷺ, and more righteous to that position? So he could have easily kept on to that power. But he didn't want any further fighting between Muslim fighting Muslim. And that fulfilled the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. So after 6 months, just approximately 6 months, now Muawiyah has now become the official Khalifa of all the Muslims, Amir al-Mu'mineen. So Muawiyah is the first of the Umayyad Khalifas, we can call what we call the Umayyads. He's from Banu Umayyah, if you remember, the clan same clan as Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu, and a very close clan to the Banu Hashim, the clan of the Prophet ﷺ from the Quraysh. But interestingly, scholars commented on this later on, that even before Islam, there was a type of rivalry between the Banu Hashim and the Banu Umayyah, which we won't go into now, but That was one of those things historically. They were closely related. Now, in some of the histories, it also says that the deal was that when Muawiyah dies, it will come back to Al Hassan. So we don't. I mean, like I said, there's a lot of different narrations and reports. So we don't know for sure what happened. But before Muawiyah died, he made his son the next Khalifa, Yazid. Yeah. So it didn't come back to the family of the Prophet ﷺ, and Yazid became the next Khalifa. And Yazid obviously is very controversial because he's the one that Sayyidina al Hussein was martyred when he was Khalifa. Yeah? Sayyidina al Hussein, radiallahu anhu, the second grandson of the Prophet, ﷺ, the younger brother of Hassan, he was martyred by army who were under the command of Yazid. Now, the scholars say that Yazid didn't actually give the order directly because that decision was taken by the army itself, the commander of the army itself. But as he was the Khalifa, he was the leader, and he didn't, as far as we know, he didn't object to it or say to them afterwards, oh, you've done a bad thing or anything like that. In fact, they took the head of Sayyidina al-Hussein, radiallahu anhu, and they took it to Yazid in Damascus, because the capital had now become Damascus, because the Umayyad, their power base was in Sham, in what we call today Syria, Jordan, Palestine. So the capital of the Umayyad Caliphate was Damascus. So his head was taken there, and the head was actually put on the floor in front of the Yazid. And one of the Sahaba that was there, he wept and he said, how many times I saw the lips of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ kissing that face. So it was a tragic, the killing of Sayyidina al-Hussein, I'm sure people are aware of that, is one of the big tragic moments in our history. And it was a massive, I mean, even more, probably even more than the killing of Sayyidina Uthman, because al-Hussein is a grandson of the Prophet ﷺ as well, very beloved to the family from the Prophet ﷺ. So it had a massive impact, in the Muslim world. And eventually it led to the downfall of the Umayyad family, because the Muslims, they never really forgave the Umayyads for that. They never forgave the Umayyads for this hostility and fighting against the family of the Prophet ﷺ. So after but the Umayyads were in power for some time, for 100 years. The Umayyad family stayed in power. But eventually they were overthrown, as we'll see later, by the Abbasids. And the main reason they were overthrown was because the Abbasid family was from the close family of the Prophet ﷺ. And that was the main reason why the Umayyads had become so unpopular, that they were overthrown. Sorry. So this is the period we're going to look at today is going to be what we call the High Caliphate period. The High Caliphate period is the period after the Rashidun, approximately around 660 to 1066. So about 400 years, a 400-year period, High Caliphate period. And this is when the Muslim world is under initially the Umayyad and then later the Abbasid. And most of the Muslim world is united under one Khalifa or one ruler during this period, although towards the end of this period, the Abbasid Caliphate starts slowly disintegrating. and you get more and more autonomous regions coming about. But even the autonomous regions, they still pay nominal allegiance to the Khalifa, the Abbasid Khalifa. Um, so the reason why we've put 1066 is just an arbitrary date. It's not. It's only because this is something that is well known to us in the West. Growing up in this country, 1066 is an iconic date of the Battle of Hastings, obviously. And part of this course is also looking at the history of the West. So that's why we've just put 1066 as an arbitrary, but some way just to help us anchor from, a lot of us are brought up in this country, studied in this country, so it helps us just to anchor the timeline. Nothing happened in the Muslim world in 1066 that was significant, but in obviously in the West, this is a bit of a significant date. But it approximately corresponds to the end of the High Caliphate period that Marshall Hodgson has, called the High Caliphate period or High Caliphal period. This slide just shows some of the different type of intellectual trends in the Muslim world during this period. So I put this slide together just to highlight several things, really. Obviously, on the top you've got the main type of intellectual movements or things that are going on in the Muslim world, and at the bottom you've got some of the big names. This is just a selection, random selection, because there's so many hundreds of big names that we could have chosen for this period. It's really the intention of the slide was really to give an idea of, because often when we study, if for example if you study in a madrasa, you will study certain things like fiqh, hadith, aqidah, but you sometimes you lose a bigger picture of the environment that these great scholars of fiqh and hadith, they weren't just growing in a vacuum. They were in a whole environment of learning which was much wider than that, especially during the Abbasid period. This is what the early Abbasid period is what is referred to in the Western textbook as the golden age of Islam. The golden age of Islam. We don't have that. We don't say it's the golden age of Islam, but this is what they call it because they're making our history into just 200 years. The golden age of Islam, that 200 years. Abbasids, it was amazing. But what happened to the other 1,000 years of amazing Muslim history? Anyway, so there was a huge sort of expansion of learning during this period. It's when we have the great Imams of fiqh, we have the great Imams of hadith, we have the great Imams of kalam or aqidah, as it's also called, the science later on. But you also have great scholars in falsafa, in philosophy, in science, in medicine, and all of these things are happening at the same time, you see. So this slide is a little bit just to show these trends. As we mentioned yesterday, the Khawarij are actually the first deviant sect to arise in Islam, in the Ummah. The Khawarij, the Haruriya, if you remember yesterday. I just emphasize this a little bit because often people think that the Shia are the earliest sect. The Shia-Sunni split is the earliest split in Islam. It's not. And this is even in many books and even in many Western academic books, you often read, the Shia-Sunni split, the earliest split in Islam. It's not by any means. Because at this time, the time of Sayyidina Ali, there's no Shia-Sunni. You can't say the people who are supporting Ali are Shia. We can't say that. There's no Sunni even at that time, but if anything, they're the Ahl-Sunnah. They're the people of the main. What is Ahl-Sunnah? What is Ahl-Sunnah? Wal Jama'ah. We use this word a lot, but what is actually Ahl-Sunnah wal Jama'ah? Or what we call Sunni. This is the main body of the Muslims, the majority group. This was a group that didn't split up. So there was actually no such thing as Ahl-Sunnah wal Jama'ah Only when these sects started splitting off, like Khawarij and later on the Shia, that's when the people who were the main group and they were sticking to the teaching of the Sahaba, yeah, they were sticking to the teaching of Sahaba, they became called Al-Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Al-Sunnah wal Jama'ah, we stay with the Jama'ah, we stay with the group, we stay with the majority, we don't split off. That's the whole meaning of Jama'ah. Yeah? And there's many hadith, obviously, Yadullah Ima al-Jama'ah, that back up this concept that as Muslims we're not supposed to. The Quran, of course, the Quran says it as well. وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ تَفَرَّقُوا وَاخْتَلَفُوا لا تكونوا كالذين تفرقوا واختلفوا من بعد ما جاءهم العلم وجاءهم البينات. Don't be like those who split up. تفرقوا فرق. Yeah, تفرقوا is from فرق. So we are the ones, we don't create firaq. You know, we try to keep the unity and we stay with the main body of the Muslims. So it's only when other sects start splitting off, that's when the Sunnis start defining themselves. You know, what is Ahl-Sunnah wal Jama'ah? And one of the key things is that we follow the teachings of the Sahaba. In other words, the Sahaba are the ones who transmitted Islam to us. You know, the Khawarij, remember the Khawarij? They split away from Ali and they declared Ali and everyone with Ali and everyone with Muawiyah all to be kuffar. Now, Sayyidina Ali, he sent Sayyidina Ibn al-Abbas to go and speak to them and debate with them. When Ibn Abbas went to them, he managed to convince some of them through proofs from Quran and Hadith. Some of them came back, but a lot of them stayed. One of the things that Ibn Abbas said, interesting thing, he said, there was not one companion, there was not one Sahaba amongst them. There was not one Sahaba amongst them. Yeah? So these are people, they think they know Islam better than the Sahaba. You know, we understand Islam, we know the Quran, we don't care if you're Sahaba. See, so I think their arrogance gets to them because of their excessive worship and all these things. Now the Shia, they accept some Sahaba, but they reject other Sahaba. Yeah? So this is one of the things with the Sunni, we accept all the Sahaba. So that's in one way, one of the defining, but so in the time of Sayyidina Ali, there's no Shia. Like in the time of Hassan, Hussein, the people who are supporting them are not Shia, they are the main group of Muslims. They are the main body of Muslims. We support them as Sunnis, right? So there's no such thing as Shia. When the Shia first come about is a few generations later. Some of the earliest, because they were called Rafida, right? The earliest Shia, they were called Rafida. What does Rafida mean? Rafad is from Rafad, meaning reject. So what were they rejecting? They were rejecting the Khilafah of Sayyidina Abu Bakr and Umar. Yeah? So this didn't happen. This happened. I mean, some of the earliest reports that we have is from, for example, from the time of Ja'far as-Sadiq. I don't know if he's on this. Got Ja'far as-Sadiq on there. Yeah, so you can see Ja'far as-Sadiq here. If I turn my highlighter on. Yeah. Ja'far as-Sadiq is contemporary of Abu Hanifa, the great Imam, and others, yeah? So Ja'far as-Sadiq is in the Shia thing, he's the sixth Imam, or fifth, or I think he's sixth. Yeah? Fifth or sixth Imam. In other words, he's like the great-great-grandson of Sayyidina Hussein. We're going to see later, I've got the family tree a bit later on, so we'll see where he comes with. I think he's great-grandson of Sayyidina Hussein. So in the time of Ja'far as-Sadiq, he had some of his people around him, they started saying negative things about Abu Bakr and Umar. They started saying Ali should have been the Khalifa. Abu Bakr and Umar, they you know. So people started getting a bit fanatic when they were remembering Sayyidina Ali. He became, his status became over in their minds. So they started saying, no, Abu Bakr was this, saying bad things about Abu Bakr and Umar. And Jafar as-Sadiq said, no, we don't accept that. What you're saying, we don't accept what you're saying. This is from our Sunni sources, yeah. Jafar as-Sadiq, rahimahullah, is greatly respected amongst the Sunnis as well. And he was a great one of the descendant of the Ahlul Bayt, etc. And according to our sources, he rejected the rejectors. He said, "No, we didn't hear this from our grandfathers. What you're saying against Umar and Abu Bakr and Umar." Yeah. So this is where we see the first stirrings of this type of extremism, where you put Sayyidina Ali so high that you start rejecting the other Khalifas before him. So that's why they were called Rafida. They reject. So, the Khawarij have already come about the time of Sayyidina Ali. So the Khawarij are the first sect. And I say deviant, obviously from our Sunni perspective, they're the first deviant sect to arise within the Ummah of Sayyidina Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Not only that, the actual beginning of the Khawarij goes back to the actual lifetime of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, which you might think is bizarre. How can you have a deviant sect actually while the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is alive himself? How can someone deviate from? It seems unbelievable, but it's true. And if you look at Sahih al-Bukhari, for example, where he has got 2 chapters about the Khawarij, he puts certain hadith in there that relate to a certain individual, that he was a Muslim during the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ, he made some remarks, he made a what do you call it, he objected, or he actually criticized the Prophet ﷺ, even though he's a Muslim, so-called Muslim. Yeah, he criticized the Prophet ﷺ to his face in front of other Sahaba. So this man, in some hadith identified, his name is Dhul Khuwaisira. Yeah? Dhul Khuwaisira. In some hadith he's not named, and in some hadith he's identified by name, Dhul Khuwaisira. So what did he do, this man? The Prophet ﷺ is distributing some wealth, it happened on 2 occasions, actually, not 1 occasion, 2 occasions. 1 occasion, the Prophet ﷺ is distributing some zakat money, and on the other occasion, he's distributing some booty that they have from the battle of Hunayn. And the Prophet ﷺ is giving, according to his wisdom, certain wealth to certain people, depending on certain wisdom, that some people, for example, they're new into Islam, but their great chief of their tribe, he would give them more to encourage them more into Islam, because then the whole tribe might come into Islam. It's things like that, We don't obviously, and this man then suddenly comes along, and he's described in the hadith quite vividly. He had a shaved head, scruffy beard. He had sort of like a prominent forehead, and it's described, And he stands in front of the Prophet ﷺ, and he says, "Ya Muhammad," very disrespectfully, because Sahaba, you don't call him Ya Muhammad, you say Ya Rasulullah or something like that, He said, "Ya Muhammad, ittaqillah, fear Allah, for I see that you are not being just. For I see that you're not being just in your distribution." Can you imagine the audacity and the disrespect of such a person? He claims to be a Muslim and following this as, this is your messenger, this is your prophet. Now, immediately, a couple of the Sahaba, they jump up. They're pulling out their swords. Yeah, there's different narrations. Some say it was Umar, some say it was Khalid. It might have been, there was 2 different occasions this happened as well. And they said, Ya Rasulullah, give us permission to strike this head of this munafiq. Because how can you claim to be a believer and part of the, and you actually saying this to the Prophet? The Prophet ﷺ stopped them. He said no, he held them back. And in some narration it said, the Prophet ﷺ said, I don't want people to think or to say that we Muslims are killing Muslims. Because from outside, what it looked like, these Sahaba, they're killing one of their own people, a Muslim. The Muslims are fighting amongst each other. So that's why the Prophet ﷺ stopped them. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala entrust me with the message with the wahi. I'm paraphrasing now, not exact word. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala trusts me with this message to humanity, but you don't trust me with distributing this thing. And when the man was then walking away, the Prophet ﷺ said to his Sahaba, from the stock of this man will come these people. When you see their prayer, you will think that your prayer is nothing. And when you see their fasting, you will think that your fasting is nothing. But the Islam leaves them like an arrow flying through the target. This is how fast the Islam leaves them, in other words. So they outwardly have like a very excessive practice of Islam. But inwardly they don't have Islam. They don't have true faith, in other words. So it's a very strange type of person. It's not the normal munafiq, Allah said in the Quran about munafiq, when they إِذَا قَامُوا لِلصَّلَاةِ قَامُوا كُسَالَى. They're very lazy in their prayer. Munafiq is very lazy in the prayer. Last minute they're rushing to catch the prayer before the prayer time ends. وَلَا يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهَ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. They don't remember Allah very much. These are different type of people. Yeah? If you look at them, they're always reciting Quran. They have big beard, huge miswak. Their trousers might be really up high above the ankles. And they're doing lots of prayers, So that in that sense, it's very dangerous as well, because a lot of people can get attracted to these, thinking that they're very, mashallah, this guy must be it's like some people when they come from Arab country to this country and they see Sikh people. They see a Sikh person with a big turban, big beard. They say, mashallah, this is a big sheikh, so you got big sheikhs there, So this is the Khawarij here, you see, that's why I put them right at the beginning. So it's something that's it's a common misconception amongst even Islamic, in Muslim books, in Western academic books. They always put the Shia as the earliest sect. And they sort of try to paint this picture that the people around Ali and Hassan and Hussein, they're like some sort of proto-Shia or some sort of early Shia group, But that's absolutely not the case. These are all Sahaba. They're like, if anything, they're Sunni. Yes, a mainstream. It's the main body of Muslims that are supporting Sayyidina Ali and Hassan and Hussein. They're the main body of the Muslims, the majority. Yeah. Okay, so that's. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Shia. We've already mentioned a little bit about them, yeah? Now, what happened, as we said, as time goes on, this is a chart we're just going to look at for a few minutes. I don't know how clear it is on there, but is it readable? The actual names are readable, yeah? Just about? Because it's... I don't know if there's any way to magnify it or something, but this is a timeline. Inshallah, we can share the slides. If anyone wants the slides afterwards, if you give your emails to Brother Imran or Shaykh Saleh, I can share these slides with people. This is, I was sort of quite proud of this, making this slide. This is It's summarized a lot of history in this, and it shows you the connections, genetic connections between all of these different historical figures and movements that they came from them, you know. So we can look at this for a few minutes. So here, if you look at the highlighter, I'm just going to put, here you can see in green, we've got the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam here. And obviously Sayyidah Khadija, right? And Fatima is obviously the daughter of Sayyidah Khadija. And she's married to Sayyidina Ali here. If you go back, we can see the linkages between the family as well. So Banu Hashim here, you can see Hashim is the great-great-grandfather of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Hashim here. He's the father of Abdul Muttalib. And the rivalry that they say historically arose between Hashim and his nephew Umayyad. So Umayyad is here. Umayyad is the nephew of Hashim because he's a son of Abdul Shams. Abdul Shams is a brother of Hashim. And Umayyad and Hashim, they had some sort of rivalry. And not in terms of violent, but just sort of more like, you know, a type of friendly rivalry, you could call it in a way. I'm not talking about fighting each other, but they had a sort of a clan rivalry. You know when one tries to be better than the other, that type of thing. So that's where Umayyad and the Umayyads come down from here. So Sayyidina Uthman, Muawiyah, Abu Sufyan, all of the Umayyads are descended from this side here. Now, from the Banu Hashim, you have obviously these are the brothers of Abdullah, the father of the Prophet ﷺ. Now, obviously, most of you probably know Abdul Muttalib had 10 sons. So I've only put 4 of them here. Yeah, I've only put the ones that are important for our history. But he actually had 10 sons, right? Al-Abbas, I'm sure you're familiar with, yeah? He's the one, uncle of the Prophet ﷺ. And I've put Hamza, the other uncle, and Abu Talib, obviously, is important because he's from the Seerah. All of these are important from the Seerah. The other thing is that Hamza and Al-Abbas, actually they're similar age to the Prophet ﷺ. Even though they're his uncles, they're the same age as him, approximately. And so that's why he was very close to them growing up. They're his uncles, but they were very close in age, so they grew up together. So they were very, very close and beloved to him. And Abu Talib was more senior, and that's why he was the head of the clan of Banu Hashim when the Prophet ﷺ is older. So Ali is the son of Abu Talib, obviously. Yeah, so Sayyidina Ali is the son of Abu Talib. And he marries Fatima. Yeah, Sayyidina Ali marries Fatima. But Sayyidina Ali is not only the cousin of the Prophet, but he grew up as in his household from a young age. Because Abu Talib at the time was going through some financial difficulties. So the Prophet ﷺ, him and Al-Abbas, they said, look, let's help Abu Talib. I'll take one of his sons, you take one of his sons. Yeah? So the Prophet ﷺ took Ali and Al-Abbas took Ja'far. And they brought them up in their own house, you know. So Al-Abbas is important because his son Abdullah ibn Abbas, who we've mentioned a few times, he was a very close companion of Sayyidina Ali. Remember Sayyidina Ali sent him to the Khawarij, for example. Abdullah ibn Abbas is also in his own right a very great scholar of the Sahaba. And specifically he's known for tafsir. And in fact the Prophet ﷺ taught him the Quran and the meanings of Quran. So amongst the younger Sahaba, he's known as Mufassirul Quran. And a lot of the tafsir that we have goes back to Abdullah ibn Abbas. If you remember Tabari, for example, if you read Tafsir al-Tabari, a lot of the tafsir of ayahs of Quran that he brings, the chains, a lot of the chains go back to Abdullah ibn Abbas or his students like Mujahid and others. They are the great transmitters of the meaning of the Quran, the tafsir of Quran. So why is it that the younger Sahaba are more famous for their knowledge, like Abdullah ibn Abbas, Abdullah ibn Umar, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, Aisha? They're all from the younger Sahaba. Why are they more famous for transmitting knowledge? The reason is because they lived a long time after the Prophet ﷺ. And they lived during a period where the jihad was really stopped, you know. So they were in Medina or in Kufa or in these different cities, and for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years they were teaching, and transmitting the Sunnah. That's why, you know, 1/4 of our Sunnah comes from Sayyidah Aisha, radiallahu anha. You know, after Abu Huraira, she's the second most prolific narrator of hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. So nearly 1/4 of our knowledge of the Sunnah is from Sayyidah Aisha. You know, so these younger Sahaba, and in fact, this is one of the things where the ulama said could be one of the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because remember we were saying yesterday how when some of the Sahaba, they started having conflict. How do we understand this wisdom of this, you know? And so some of the ulama said one of the wisdom was that, for example, you know, if Sayyidina Ali had continued, if the jihad had continued, Sahaba would have been going further and further out, you know, scattering. But in a way, because, you know, things settled down, people, the Sahaba, they were there then in Medina, Kufa, these places, and they were teaching rather than out on jihad with the sword, you know. So the religion, the deen was preserved by the teaching from these Sahaba. So Allah knows the wisdoms He has in these things, you know, that happen, that we never can expect. So Abdullah ibn Abbas is one of these younger Sahaba who's very famous for teaching afterwards. But the point here is that the Abbasids, who we're going to talk about, you know, the Abbasids, they are descended from Abdullah ibn Abbas and Al-Abbas. That's why they're called Abbasids. And that's the descent here, you can see. The first Abbasid Khalifa is this one, Abdullah as-Safah. Yeah, Abdullah as-Safah is the first Abbasid Khalifa, and they take the power from the Umayyad family. And then his brother Al-Mansur is the second Abbasid Khalifa. Al-Mansur, he's the one who builds Baghdad as a new capital of the Abbasids, yeah? Al-Mansur. And then going down, obviously it stays within the Abbasid family for many centuries. Now on the other side here, if we look at the Ahlul Bayt side, so if you look at Fatima and Ali here, they've got Hassan and Hussein. And all of the family of the Prophet ﷺ that survived down the generations either goes back to Hassan Hussein. Now, after Sayyidah Fatima radiallahu anha passed away, Sayyidina Ali did marry other women after she died, and one of them was Khawla bint Ja'far, and they had a famous son called Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiya. He was famous. He became one of a great person of the Ahlul Bayt and from the family of Sayyidina Ali. But the direct descendants of the bloodline of the Prophet ﷺ are only coming from Hassan and Hussein. And obviously until today they're called Hassani or Husseini. You don't really hear Husseini much, but you hear Hassani a lot. But so these are the ones in red, the ones that I've put in red: Al-Hussein, Zayd ibn Ali, Muhammad Nafs al-Zakiyya, and Ibrahim. So one of them is from Hussein's descent, and two of them are from Sayyidina al-Hassan. I've put them in red. These ones in red are those that led a rebellion against the Khalifa of their time. And sadly, on each occasion they were defeated or killed. Yeah? So Al-Hussein radiallahu anhu, obviously he was martyred by the Umayyad army. His grandson Zayd ibn Ali also led a uprising, which was also crushed against the Umayyads, I believe. And Ibrahim and Muhammad, they were actually in uprising against the Abbasid. So the interesting thing that happened with the Abbasids is that even though they came to power on the flag of the family of the Prophet ﷺ, yeah, the whole revolution, the whole uprising of the Abbasid against the Umayyad was on the banner of the family of the Prophet ﷺ. You know, because remember this rivalry, this thing that the Muslims never forgave the Umayyads, right? So the Muslims generally they supported the Abbasid uprising, and they accepted the Abbasid, you know, when they came into power. But there was one problem, that the Abbasid, they're not actually from the direct line of the Prophet ﷺ. As you can see, they're from his uncle. Yeah, so they're from Banu Hashim, and according to some ulama, Ahlul Bayt includes the descendants of Al-Abbas and the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ as well. But I don't know if that was introduced later on to, in some ways, to justify the Abbasid claim. So that was a slight glitch. That was a slight problem. The majority of the Muslims, especially the Sunnis, they accepted the Abbasids as the right Khalifas, because remember, with the Sunni, the fiqh, it has to be someone from Quraysh. It doesn't have to even be Ahlul Bayt anyway. Right? So the Abbasids were accepted by the majority and by the Sunni ulama. But some of these more, as we see later on, now we're getting these more fanatic people that they want only from the Ahlul Bayt. They believe, it becomes part of their doctrine, right? They develop a doctrine that the Khilafah must be from the lineage of descendants of Hassan or Hussein. So these are the early sort of Shia groups that are coming about now. Amongst the Shia groups, there's many different ones, right? So some of them actually, they believe that Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiyyah, they believe that he was the Mahdi, and that in fact, he's the first one that they started saying he's the Mahdi. So they believe that when he died, they believe that he hasn't really died. He's disappeared, and one day he's going to come back. He's going to be the Mahdi. Yeah, Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiyyah. He's actually the first sort of cult of the Mahdi cult that comes about historically. Now later on, you get the split. The major split is between the Sevener Shia and the Twelvers. Yeah. So what are the Seveners? The Seveners, they trace the Imams down this chain here. So from they go down to Jafar as-Sadiq. Yeah. So we all accept Jafar as-Sadiq here, the sixth Imam. Even the Sunnis take him as a great scholar. One of his sons, Ismail, this is who the Sevener Shias believe in, Ismail. That's why they're also called Ismailis. Yeah, so they believe in the son of, whose name is Ismail, son of Jafar as-Sadiq. They believe he is the seventh Imam, right? So they're known as Ismailis. They're a bit more, the mainstream nowadays are the Twelvers in Iran and everywhere, but you still get that these Agha Khanis people might have heard of. They're Ismailis, right? Historically, they were a lot bigger at some times, like the Fatimids of Egypt, one of the major empires in Egypt, the Fatimids, they were Ismailis. So historically, they were more important probably than they are today. But the Twelvers, they trace the other son of Jafar as-Sadiq, Musa al-Kazim, and through his descendants all the way down to the 12th Imam. And the 12th Imam, they believe he disappeared. In fact, he died in one of the Abbasid prisons. But the legend grew that he's not actually died in the prison, he's disappeared, gone back to Allah, and one day he will come back to lead the Shias to victory. So he's the Mahdi that they're waiting for. Yeah. The funny thing is, well, I find it funny, but I don't know if any of you, some people who are into like, like about akhir, things about akhir. You do read books about akhir zaman, Dajjal, and all these things that will happen. Um, I don't know if any of you have read about this character called the Sufyani. Has anyone come across amongst the sort of things that will happen? Alamatu sa'a, signs of the. There's someone called the Sufyani that will come in the future. So this actually was from the Umayyad that we're going to look at. If we look at the Umayyads, the first Umayyad Khalifa is who? Muawiyah, right? And then after him Yazid. Now Muawiyah, he was Khalifa for about 15 years, quite a long time. And even though he's unpopular amongst the broader Sunni because of the opposition to the family of the Prophet ﷺ, he was a very successful, in many ways he was very successful. He was very charismatic leader. And don't forget he's a Sahabi, so we always keep a good opinion as well of his intentions and things. He was a very strong leader. He was very charismatic. People loved him, especially Shami people were fanatic about him, And he was one of those people who was very, people got very attached to him. So they loved it, then his son became the Khalifa, and it stayed in his family. But then, after Yazid or somewhere along the line, it got taken into another branch of the Umayyad family. So it went out of Muawiyah's direct family to another branch of the Umayyad family. And some of the fanatic supporters of Muawiyah's family, they developed this type of idea that one day Allah's going to send this leader called the Sufyani, and he will be a descendant of Muawiyah. Because remember, Muawiyah's father is Abu Sufyan. So that's why it's called the Sufyani. Sorry, I always find this very hysterical. I don't know why. This Sufyani character is going to come back and lead them back to victory and everything, the Muawiyah's family. But the funny thing is, because it got incorporated into some of our books, that talk about Alamatu Sa'a, because some of our more extensive scholars, they brought everything. They didn't just bring the strong narration and things. They just, let's collect everything, even if it's weak. So you do see some books nowadays written by, scholars talking about signs of the last day, and they mention the Sufyani. That they still expect he's going to come, and they incorporate it into that whole, thing. Have you come across that? People have come across. It's not just me going crazy or anything. It's a very good question. I like that question. Once again, I'm not. Sometimes I can't always give very clear black and white answers to things, But I think that's the nature of things sometimes, The Ahlul Bayt have got a very special status within the Sunni. Within our Sunni, it's just a fact. In our prayer, that's what we say. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala ali Muhammad. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's just a fact. The Prophet ﷺ taught us that, and we say that every day, 5 times a day. We're making dua for him and his family. There's no way you can, So. It's interesting as well that as you said, there's many hadith as well, about follow me and my family. And Shaykh al-Yaqubi, one of my teachers, he said actually, because everyone always give that narration, after me, follow the Kitab and the Sunnah, my Sunnah. But the narrations about follow me and my family are more numerous in terms of the transmissions that are there than the ones that say follow me and my Sunnah. So the Ahlul Bayt, without doubt, there is a certain type of and they can even, we can look at them as source of guidance, but of course they're human beings like anyone else. So you get righteous, unrighteous from the Ahlul Bayt, and you get some that are knowledgeable, some that are not knowledgeable. They're just they're just people, obviously, but because of our love of the Prophet ﷺ, we love them, even if they're righteous or unrighteous or whoever they are, they're from his family. You know what I mean? It's like if your own son, if he's not a righteous person, you're not going to start hating your own son or your daughter. You still love them because they're your children, no matter who they are, you know? And so that's why the Quran said, "A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, an-nabiyyu awla bil mu'minina min anfusihim." The Prophet ﷺ is more closer to the believers than their own selves. You know, and obviously there's many hadiths about loving the Prophet ﷺ. You probably know the one about Sayyidina Umar, that, until you love me more than yourself. And he said, I love you more than myself, etc. So part of loving someone, of course, you have to love their family. That otherwise you're hip. You're not. It's not true. You don't truly love him if you don't love his family. So I think that sort of respect would come naturally. We don't have to like say, oh, let's have certain rituals we have to do, that we have to put them in certain position or kiss their hands. But naturally, you might, if you're in a gathering and there's someone from Ahlul Bayt and there's a scholar, for example, you might say to them, come and sit at the front. Of course, nothing wrong with that. Where I studied in Syria, it's an amazing, mashallah, amazing, may Allah protect those people. And, before the war started, and Shaykh Saleh will know as well about Syria, like, the place was amazing, and that they have gatherings, I've never seen this anywhere else, the gatherings are so meticulously organized. There's so, mashallah, so very poor people. Syrian were poor people. They're not wealthy people. It was a socialist country. And they all had bread to eat. I didn't see a single beggar in the street when I was in Syria. It was a poor country, but no beggars. Because the socialist government, they had these very cheap food bakeries. They were called government bakeries, and they make the bread very, very cheap. People can eat bread. And if you're a bit more wealthy, you go to the private bakeries, where they put a bit more seeds on the bread or something like that. But if you just want normal, it's nice proper bread, I don't know what you call it, naan type of bread. And they had these government groceries as well. Like, so they had this big warehouse where they have all the very cheap groceries, like vegetables, that people had their bellies were full. And they would, if you go to the gatherings, they would very neatly organize it. They wouldn't say in the masjid, many gathering in masjid, like big gatherings, like hundreds of people. But you always have a few khadim that are like arranging everyone to sit in neatly in rows. If any scholar comes in, they will bring them to the front, sit where the scholars are sitting. If you're a munshid, you sit where the munshids are sitting, you go to the inshad. There's always there's a passage so people can, if someone has to come to the front, they can walk through. So people are very neatly arranged, in these gatherings. So I think we can learn a lot from these traditions. So if you're a certain, if you're a scholar or if you're well known Ahlul Bayt, you may be taken to sit at the front. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. Obviously, that's a good thing. So I don't know if that answers the question fully, but that's a sort of turning to them from guidance is a thing. Like, obviously, amongst our great scholars, many have been Ahlul Bayt, many haven't been Ahlul Bayt as well. Imam Shafi was Ahlul Bayt, but the other three Imams, they're not Ahlul Bayt. So I think the guidance in terms of religious guidance can come from whoever has the knowledge. But I think there may be, Allah may have destined, that that when some true leaders do emerge, maybe they will be from the Ahlul Bayt. We don't know. I don't know. That's all I can say. The other interesting thing is, as we said, the Abbasids, they came into power. So the Abbasids, they stayed in power for a long time, and the Abbasid family became very, very, almost venerated, They were very popular. They knew how to do the propaganda, keep the masses happy. So they were very popular by and large family amongst the Muslims. It was a time of great prosperity, And even though the leader, the Khalifas themselves may not have some of them been the most religious people, they portrayed themselves, they took the religion seriously. So we're not judging individual characters. That's a different matter. But they were representing Islam, and they were, the Muslims generally were very happy under the Abbasids. And however, as I said, there was always a group amongst the Ummah that wanted, no, 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 we want someone from the direct descendant of Hassan and Hussein, right? These became known as Shias, but also amongst even Sunnis, obviously, that's something we would love to see. Someone from the family of the Prophet as our leader, we would love to see that. So it's a general sentiment as well. Now, interesting thing happened. One of the great Abbasid Khalifas, it was Al-Mamun. He was I think it's in the slide actually. Yeah, here. It's actually the slide on there now. Al-Mamun, he's the son of Harun Rashid. He's one of the great Abbasid. He was a scholar, he was a thinker. He actually embraced the Mu'tazilite teaching, which were rationalists. But however, he was very concerned about this question of Ahlul Bayt and why people are still grumbling about, Abbasid, and they want the family. So he actually decided, he said, after I die, it's not going to stay in the Abbasid family. It's going to go to a direct descendant of the Prophet ﷺ. And he actually made a public announcement, yeah? And he appointed Ali al-Rida. Ali al-Rida is from the 12 Shia, he's the 8th Imam. Yeah, the 8th Imam of the 12ers. So he's a descendant of Al-Hussein. And at that time, he was like the head of the Ahlul Bayt, like unofficial head. So Al-Mamun, he said, after I die, and he made a public announcement, it's going to go to Ali al-Rida. Not only that, the color of the Abbasid was black. Yeah, so the Abbasid color from the beginning of the Abbasid was black. The flags were black. Everyone who was serving the Khalifa had to wear black uniforms. He changed the color to green. Green was the color of the Ahlul Bayt. It represented Ahlul Bayt. But the funny thing happened was that there was a massive public outcry against this move. People were not happy. Yeah, the majority, they were, by this time, the Abbasids were so popular that people said, no, you can't do this. We want to keep it within the Abbasid family. So now what happened was, because obviously the Khalifas made a formal pronouncement, you can't take it back. I mean, it'd be very embarrassing. It's not like nowadays, Boris Johnson say one thing, next day take it back. If you're a Khalifa, you're like, you've made a declaration, you can't like say, oh, sorry, I take it back. What happened, I mean, Ali al-Rida died before Ma'mun. Yeah? So he had a way out, a back door, so he just quietly forgot about the thing. And then it stayed in the Abbasid family. The other thing is, around a little bit later than this, around about 950 in the Christian calendar, you had the first serious break from the Abbasid, and that was the Fatimid. Yeah, the Fatimids, they set up a caliphate in Egypt opposing the Abbasids. Yeah. Now the Fatimid, as you can tell by the name, they are descendant from Sayyidah Fatima specifically. Because even amongst the Shia, they had different, so some of them said as long as it's descended from Ali. Yeah, so remember Ali had other children apart from Fatima. They said we accept them, but some Shias, they said no, it has to be from descendant of Fatima, so Hassan and Hussein. So these Fatimids, they were from the Ismaili, they seized power in Egypt and they set up their own caliphate. And the first Khalifa was a descendant, or claimed to be a descendant from from Hussein, I believe. And the funny thing is, not funny, but tragically funny, he turned out to be a very, very ruthless, tyrannical, like almost crazy man. He was the sort of person who would say, off with the head, chop his head off. Anyone, he's not happy with something, chop their heads off, throw them in boiling oil. A very arbitrary, executing people, unjust. The interesting thing is he was still very, very popular. People loved him. The Egyptian Fatima, they loved him because he's from Ahlul Bayt. It's the first time now the Muslims have seen a direct descendant of the Prophet ﷺ in a position of power for a long, long time. So despite his eccentricities, that we call them, he remained very popular amongst the people. So yeah, that's the sort of story, So the Umayyad family, when the Abbasid came to power, they basically massacred the whole of the Umayyad family because you don't want anyone to have a claim back to power. Now, obviously, when we read about these type of things, like, oh, they massacred the whole Umayyad family, I was speaking to Brother Zubair about how you'll see in Islam, when you have succession from Mughal emperor to the next, or Ottoman, their brothers are fighting brothers, killing each other, Muslims killing Muslims. Obviously, we think, oh, why? Well, this is crazy. Why are they doing this? We also have to understand the context a little bit now, because these are not like modern police states that we're used to living in, right? We live in modern. We probably don't realize it, but we live in very tightly controlled police states. Yeah, they give the illusion of freedom. With this whole thing about the free world, and all this. You've got freedom to do anything your nafs wants to do, but you haven't got true freedom. These are very, very strictly controlled and managed places that we live in. The only time you will find that if you start threatening the state itself, then you see how hard the hand of the state comes down. Anyway, the point is, in before modern times, before about 100 years ago, 150 years ago, you didn't have communications, you didn't have this type of command center where you can control things, like you can nowadays. So the biggest concern of any leader in the past is to maintain stability and peace within your empire or within your kingdom or whatever. Yeah, that's your biggest concern, and that's also your biggest duty. If you look at, many of our Muslim scholars, they wrote about the duties of the Khalifa and the philosophy of government, politics. Nearly all of the scholars wrote something about this matter. And, one of the highest concern and duty of a Khalifa or a leader, Sultan, is to maintain the peace and security of your realm, of your people. Because ultimately, what do normal, everyday Joe Bloggs people like me and you want? We just want to live in peace and security, right? We just want to live in peace, bring up our children, like Imam Zaid said to us one day. You just want to go, do your honest day's work, go home, play with your kids, go to sleep, yeah? Have a nice food probably as well, yeah? Make sure your wife is a good cook. And that's basically what every normal people want to have. And we want to be free to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what Islam brings, It brings freedom of worship. People should be free to live their lives, worship their creator. Even if they're Muslim, Jews, Christians, the Muslims tolerated every religion. I personally think this is one of the great things that our ulama did when they went into India. And some people criticize it, that when the Muslims went to India, they came across the Hindus now. Before that, they come across Jews, Christians, people of the book. We know what to do with them. We tolerate them. We let them live according to their own communities and their own laws. But these guys are idol worshippers. What do we do with them? They're mushrikun. Right? Do we need to kill them all? Do we need to, repress their religion? Slaughter them all, man, woman and child, force them to become Muslim? What do we do? The ulama there and then they had to give the fatwa. They said, no, we accept, we tolerate them. We let them practice their religion. We accept them as a type of similar to the Ahlul Bayt, to the Ahlul Kitab, as dhimmis. Right? Now people have criticized that. They say, oh no, no. Especially nowadays, you get some of the fanatic Muslims who want to kill everyone. Yeah, we should have just killed them all once and for all. Yeah, but I personally think it was one of those defining moments. Where those ulama they understood Islam. And some of our ulama they went to the extent they were studying the Hindu religion. They were doing proper anthropological studies. I think it was Biruni, one of them, that wrote a lot about the Hind, the Indian religion, their thing. And they even said, amongst their higher level, the Brahmins and these people, they worship one God. And things like that. I mean, I'm not saying, so there was a sort of type of respect, That's my opinion. I think it was, because Islam didn't come to, oppress people. So when we look at these type of things, the Umayyad family being massacred, the thing to remember, and throughout our Islamic history, you'll see this, some of the great caliphs, sultans like Harun Rashid, but if anything threatens their power, they will be ruthless, absolutely ruthless. They will literally massacre any type of hint of anyone trying to threaten their power. And I think this does have to be understood. I'm not justifying, I'm not saying it's right. It's not right. It's definitely not right to do that. Yeah, from Islamic point of view. But from a historical point of view, there's no other way to maintain a type of peace and security and stability among such a vast empire. Because the nature of people are they start rebelling. People want to grab power for themselves. So if you give any type of scope, any type of leeway, you're going to start having people trying to grab power for themselves. You're going to have a breakdown of the security and the peace and the order of that society. So you see this with the Islamic empires, and you see this before with the Roman empires, the Chinese. This is a common theme throughout pre-modern history. That any sort of imperial powers, they have to maintain one thing they have to do, no matter how sort of just or good or they are for their people. If there's any hint of rebellion, it must be crushed, and it has to be done ruthlessly, because you have to send a message to anyone else thinking of such a thing. So that's kind of like the context, and that's sort of, I guess, the justification that they must have had to themselves, given to themselves when they saw any type of hint of any type of rebellion. So the Abbasids have now come into power. They're a very successful, it's a time of great prosperity, the golden age of Islam, an age of great learning. Some of the great caliphs like Harun Rashid, they open up the Baytul Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. So there's a lot of funding, a lot of money being put in to scholarly work and research. And the caliphs themselves are putting a lot of money, but also wealthy Muslims within the society, like a famous family, the Barmakid family. The Barmakid family is actually a family that came from Khorasan, so from what is now Central Asia. And they had come from a Buddhist background, and they were great scholars of before Islam. They were knowledgeable people. And then they came into Islam, and they ended up coming into Baghdad, because the initial Abbasid uprising, the army came from Khorasan. Yeah, they were bringing the black flags from the east. So there's a lot of hadith about this that mix people up as well. So the Abbasids, the initial Abbasids actually came from Khorasan, so they're now settled in Baghdad. Well, they built Baghdad, Mansur built Baghdad. And so, the Barmakids, they became the viziers, the grand viziers. So they were bringing a sort of a type of the Buddhist teaching, not the teaching, obviously they become Muslim now, but that tradition, the knowledge from that tradition as well, was coming in of government and things like that. And they were basically running the Abbasid uh, empire at that time, the early period, um, until Harun Rashid. Harun Rashid was very close to the Barmakid family, but at one point, a tragic incident, he actually suddenly turned against them. And one of his closest friends, he had him killed, and the other family was exiled. Once again, historians have written a lot about why this happened. No one really knows the exact reasons why Harun Rashid did that, but it seems, I think he may have been getting quite paranoid slowly that they were becoming too powerful. Maybe they were threatening once again the power of the Abbasid family itself. But anyway, um, so this sort of sponsorship of knowledge is taking place. The Muslim scholars are translating many texts of different cultures. So the Greek philosophy is being translated to Arabic, the Indian Sanskrit is being translated, even Chinese is being translated. So Muslims are seeking knowledge wherever they can find. Now, obviously, one of the the one of the tradition that they really like is the Greek intellectual tradition. So the Muslim scholars, they love the philosophy of the Greeks that they're discovering. Aristotle and the science and all of these things. So this becomes a very big thing within the Muslim world. Um, and as we've seen, many of the Abbasid, not just Al-Ma'mun, but many of the Abbasids, they tried to mend this sort of rift or this type of thing between the family of the Prophet ﷺ and the Abbasid family. They tried to sort of come to some sort of reconciliation. And to a large degree, they did manage to reconcile this thing over time. But you always had some fanatic Shia groups that continued, through time. This was the map of the Abbasid under the peak, Harun Rashid. This was the map at the peak of their time. You can see here North Africa, Arabia, Sham, all the way going right up into sort of the Caucasus, Northern Caucasus regions, Azerbaijan, um, Iraq, Persia. Yeah, so vast empire. It's the greatest empire. During the time of Harun Rashid and these people, there was no actual threat, external threat. Yeah, there was no other enemy that could actually threaten the Abbasids. That's how powerful they were. Yeah, they had a lot of jihad against the Romans still. So the Romans were now based here. This is Constantinople here. So the Roman Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, was around this region, what is today Turkey and parts of Greece. Yeah, and but the Romans were no way militarily a match. You can see they're almost surrounded and they're vastly outsized. But the Abbasids, they liked to do jihad against the Romans. Yeah, Harun Rashid became quite obsessed about it. Yeah, so generally, typically, the pattern was every year you send out an army of jihad. It's considered, remember the Abbasids had this Islamic propaganda as well. So part of that, keep the ulama happy as well. We're doing jihad, we're spreading Islam, you know. Um, so every year there would generally be an army going out against usually against the Romans. That was the main other power, really. You're not going to go to the Indians because you got the mountains, you got the Himalayas, and Chinese are even further. So the Romans are right here on our northern doorstep. So let's go against the Romans. And I think the other reason, because Harun Rashid became quite obsessed, he used to lead the army himself towards the end of his life every year, and he actually moved out of Baghdad to be closer to the border towards the end of his life. So he could personally lead the jihad against the Romans. And I think, and no one, I don't, and this is just my opinion, I've got this feeling it's because of that hadith. You know, the hadith about the one who conquers Constantinople. You know the famous hadith that Constantinia will be conquered and that will be the best army and the best leader. And I personally think he wanted to be that person because he wanted to get Constantinople, but he never got Constantinople. So the Romans actually held out until the Ottomans finally took Constantinople much, much later, yeah, 1453. So we're talking right after the next period, the middle period, towards the end of the middle period. The Romans are finally defeated by the Muslims under the Ottomans. But Harun Rashid used to lead a lot of armies, you know, raiding into their territory, but he never managed to take Constantinople. Now, due to lack of time, I'm going to skip quite a few of these slides, inshallah, because we want to finish just talking a little about what's happening in Europe at this time as well. So we're going to skip the slides about Harun Rashid and about life in Baghdad generally, because we don't have time. But I will encourage people, if you are interested, we do run this history course in a much more detail. And it will be running again around about September time, inshallah. So if anyone wants to attend, we will be running it again, but the full length course, which is 25 lessons of 2 hours each lesson. So we can go into a lot of these things in a lot more detail. Yeah. So if you are interested, please feel free to get in touch, inshallah, and we can sign you up. And I'm intending to make it available online at some point in the future, but that might be some time in the future, where it becomes like a recorded course online. So we're gonna sadly have to skip a lot of these slides where we were going to talk about Harun Rashid, but I've talked about him a little bit anyway. And I wanted to spend. We might just for a few 3-4 minutes. I mean, the other thing is when we study history, you know. It's very important to remember history is not all about the conquerors and the people at the top. And the history is about the normal people, the average Joe Bloggs, people that lived during those times, yeah? But when you read a lot of history books, you don't learn about what was life like for normal people in those times. And especially this is something the Muslims are really guilty of, because I've read a few the histories that are available in English. I read back in the day, and if you read the histories of Islam in English, you basically read a whole book. It's all about the rulers, you know, and the fights and the wars and the battles between them, and it gives you quite a sort of a negative image of our history, because you just think it's all chaotic. There's endless fighting and wars and battles, and this is really, really skewed and wrong. We remember throughout the Islamic millennium, throughout the 1,000 years of Islamic history that we're talking about, the vast majority of people, ordinary people, lived in a state of peace and security, either under one of these large caliphates or empires or whatever it was. They lived in this freedom that I'm talking about. They had freedom to live their lives in peace and security, go about their business, go about their worship. And even when you had the leaders fighting each other for power, it didn't, by and large, it did not affect the normal people. You know, so for example, if you lived in a place like Damascus or another city in the Muslim world, the leadership might change. You know, the Sultan might be fighting each other, but that fighting was very limited. It wasn't like modern warfare, what we have nowadays. Like the First World War, Second World War, everyone gets conscripted and all these things. This is a complete change of so in those days, you know, these fights were normally with quite small armies. You know, if one sultan is fighting another sultan, they might have a few hundred, even a couple of thousand, and they fight the other army. And sometimes there wouldn't be that many casualties. You know, there'll be some few people dead, and then one side surrenders. and then the conflict is, and then you got your new leader. For the Joe blogs, masses of people that are living in these regions, they're not involved in that fighting, one Muslim fighting another Muslim for power. So it's very important always to remember what was life like during that period for ordinary people, when we read history. So part of the thing I do in my history course is I put a focus on that as well, to try to understand what was life like. So we were going to go through some slides about, what was life like in Baghdad if you lived in Baghdad during the Abbasid period. But we won't have time today. But inshallah, when we do the Ottoman, we will talk a bit more about life for the ordinary person. Yeah? What was life like if you were a farmer living in a village? What was life like if you lived in an Ottoman town? This is just about Harun Rashid. And these were the slides about Baghdad that I was going to talk about. Because Baghdad was the greatest city on earth at during that period. There was a huge amount of affluence, a lot of wealth. It was like the New York or the London of today. Like, hopefully not exactly like, but in some ways, I mean, in terms of its affluence, and everyone wants to be there in Baghdad. So there were all these palaces, canals. It was a city built between two rivers, Tigris and Euphrates. A beautiful history that we have. It was like Venice in that sense, Many people had to go around on boats. A lot of canals were built in Baghdad. Very egalitarian. This is not according to me, but according to non-Muslim historians. Yeah, egalitarian meaning in Islam there was never any such thing as racism. Yeah, there was no such thing as racism. There was a healthy pride in one's lineage or background or whatever, As we mentioned before, Islam doesn't negate that. But there was no such thing as one race is superior. Because what is racism? You actually believe that one race is superior to another race simply because of their race. And there's no such thing in Islam. Even though I'm not saying there was no inequality. There were not everyone was equal, of course, but racism specifically was not there as a belief. Many of the Khalifas, their mothers were, for example, Greek or from other, Greek ex-slaves or things like that, So there was a very multi-ethnic, and throughout Islamic history we see that very multi-ethnic empires, The Ottomans were very multi-ethnic. So there was no concept of, one race or one ethnicity is better than another. These were the types of people that lived in Baghdad. And once again, this is from a non-Muslim. Because if I say this, people are going to say, "Oh, but you're just biased or whatever." This is all coming from a non-Muslim who wrote one of his books. André Clos is a French historian who wrote about Baghdad and Harun Rashid. Yeah, these are quotes from him. He said, "There's not the slightest trace of racial segregation. Healthy pride in one's origins, no question." Yeah, he says racism was unknown in Islam and unknown as hate. Also unknown was hatred for Christians, Jews, or others. And if you look at our history, we should be proud of this, Throughout our history, you go to any great Muslim city in the world today, you have a Jewish quarter, you have Christian quarter, you have Shia quarter. People lived in their own areas, but there was a lot of tolerance for each other, The daily life, the masjids, the hammam was an important place, The hammam was something that the Muslims had taken from the Romans. And the Muslims really liked that idea, public baths, because obviously in Islam there's a lot of ghusl and wudu and cleanliness. So the Muslims really embraced that from the Roman culture. And so in Muslim cities you always had hammams, and sometimes they were attached to the masjids. So people would also, it's like a gathering place sometimes, people go I suppose how they go to the gym nowadays or something. Cuisine, holidays, sports, games, all of these things we should talk about, because it's important to appreciate. But we don't have time today, inshallah, but we'll come back to that. So just in the last 10 or 15 minutes, we'll just talk a little bit about what's happening in Europe. Yeah. So why we focus on Europe is obviously at this time there's no America or Australia. These are lands that have got their native people. So Western civilization at this time is Europe, right? Um, America has not been discovered by Columbus. Australia has not been discovered by, was it Cook or something? Wasn't it? Discovered James Cook or something. So what's happening in Europe? This is now taking us back to before Islam, right? So this is actually the height of the Roman Empire, just to give us a bit of context. So the height of the Roman Empire around about 100 AD or CE. This is the Roman Empire at its height. So you can see it covers a lot of what this is now what we were talking about, the Abbasids, yeah? This is Abbasid lands. It goes into Constantinople. And then a large part of Europe, at the height of the Roman Empire, a large part of Europe is also under the Roman Empire, including Britain. Yeah? Remember Julius Caesar coming to Britain, etc. And they also have a large part of North Africa. So later on, before Islam, once again, the Roman Empire splits into two. The Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire. This happens around about 300 something, or around about 400. And the Western Roman Empire is around Rome. Rome is the capital, and parts of Europe. Britain by that time has already fallen out of the Roman Empire, I believe. But parts of Europe and the West are called the Western Roman Empire. And the Eastern Roman Empire is the capital is Constantinople, and it contains this region here, which we've seen already, which is what the Muslims will be fighting against. But what happened to the Western Roman Empire? The Western Roman Empire before Islam, approximately 100 years before Islam, it collapses. And it collapses under the barbarian invasions or the barbarian migrations. So remember, we've talked about barbarians before. The barbarians was a term that was given by the Romans to people outside of civilization. Right? So essentially, the Roman Empire was threatened by barbarians from all sides. Yeah? So from the north here to the north, you had the Germanic tribes and also the steppe people. The steppe people, remember from the Eurasian steppe, they were coming across into Eastern Europe. So the barbarians from the north are the Germanic tribes and the steppe tribes. These are like Turkic type of people that come across from the east. Yeah? So they're on the north. And to the south, you have the Saharan nomads here. And this is actually the term Berber. You've heard of Berbers, yeah? That's from barbarian. That's actually derived from the Roman term. For them was, these are barbarians, so they're called Berbers until today. Don't tell the Berbers where the name came. They probably know, I don't know. And then we can't see that on the map, but the other border from the Roman Empire was actually Arabia, the northern Arabia. So they were threatened by the Arab Bedouins. So they dealt with the Arab Bedouins by forming a buffer zone, where they had some of the Arab tribes that lived on the border of the Roman Empire. They sort of, they basically bought them out, and they became clients of the Romans. And they became Christian as well. So they became like a buffer against the actual Arab inside the Arabia. However, the northern these tribes, you can see in all these different colors, there were many of them, and we don't have time to talk about all of them, obviously, right now. But you might recognize some of the names, like the Goths, the Visigoths, the Vandals, the Huns, a bit earlier on, before Islam as well. The Huns were the ones that came from the Eurasian steppe. Now these other ones, here, you can see up here, the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes, they migrated into England, right? And so that's why the Angles and the Saxons, that's where you get the Anglo-Saxons. They were initially from this area, Germania. The Romans call it Germania, yeah? So that's why they call Germanic tribes. So that's why the English consider themselves to be descended from Anglo-Saxon tribes from Germany. Yeah. One of the biggest of the tribe, barbarian tribe, were the Franks in the red hair. The Franks are a very important tribe. They settled down in what is today France and Germany. So they created a very large kingdom after the Western Roman kingdom, Western Roman Empire collapsed. The Franks created a massive kingdom covering France and Germany today. And one of their most famous kings was Charlemagne, that you may have heard of, yeah? So Charlemagne, he had a huge kingdom, and he actually sent messengers to Harun Rashid in Baghdad with some gifts, an envoy. And Harun Rashid sent back some gifts and some messages, friendly messages to Charlemagne. So this is one of the first contacts that the Muslims had with the European Christians. They know the Romans very well, yeah? But the Romans are Greek Orthodox, right? The Romans are Greek Orthodox. And the Western Christians, like these barbarians, they are converting, because remember they're barbarians, but they're converting now to Christianity, but it's a Roman Catholic Christianity. Okay, so when the Western Roman Empire basically disintegrated, the bishop in Rome, he was part of the Greek Orthodox Church that was based in Constantinople, but he went rebel. Yeah, he said, "Oh, I'm not going to listen to those guys in Constantinople anymore. I'm going to go my own way," and he called himself the Pope. Yeah, so that's where the Roman Catholic Church is born. Yeah? Before that, they were part of the Constantinople Greek Orthodox Roman Church. It was a Roman church, of the Roman Empire, because Constantinople was the capital, not Rome. The capital had moved to Constantinople a long time ago. Anyway, so the Pope has created his own church now, Roman Catholic. So a lot of these barbarians that are settling down in Western Europe, Northern Europe, they're converting into Christianity, and they're coming into the Roman Catholic Church. So this is why, the Muslims, they knew the Romans, but now they're getting this messenger coming from Charlemagne. And why would Harun Rashid be friendly with him? Because remember, your enemy's enemy is your friend. Because Charlemagne is also setting himself up as an alternative to the Roman emperor in Constantinople. Yeah? The Pope is having conflict with the Constantinople. So Harun Rashid, the Muslims, it's not mentioned in the Muslim chronicles, this thing, but it's mentioned in the Christian documents that this thing was sent from Harun Rashid to Charlemagne. So anyway, the point is, this is why the Europeans are called Ifranji. Even till very recently, in the Muslim world, they were called Ifranji. Yeah, it's from Franks. Yeah? So for many centuries, across the Arabic-speaking and Muslim world, all Western Europeans were called Ifranji. Yeah, from Franks. They didn't realize that the English are Anglo-Saxons or things. They call them all Ifranji. So this is what's happening in Western Europe. You've got these barbarian tribes moving around, but then they're settling down and they're forming kingdoms and they're converting to Christianity. And this is known as the Dark Ages or the early Middle Ages, or the Dark Ages in Europe, because the sort of Roman culture, high civilization is gone. These are like barbarian tribes. Charlemagne couldn't read or write. He tried his best to learn reading towards the end of his life, but he was not successful. So at that point, they're barbarians. Now, obviously, later on, they've now become Christian. They start getting civilization and things like that. Um, so that's the initial period that we're talking about. Now, what happens in 793? You have the beginning of the Viking Age, and that goes all the way on until 1066. Yeah? The Norman invasion of Britain in 1066 is conventionally considered the end of the Viking Age in Europe. Um, so this is a very significant one. Again, it's sort of part of the Dark Ages because you've got the Vikings now. The Vikings for over 200 years, they're coming out of Scandinavia, and it's a bit like what we've talked about before. These tribal people pouring out and invading the settled civilizations. The Vikings, even though they're not these sort of nomadic type people, they've got similar characteristics to the nomadic tribal people that we've talked about, because they're from a very, very harsh environment, the very north of Europe, Norway, Sweden. It's very cold. I don't know if any of you have been to Norway, but there's some parts of Norway. The days are so long. It's called the land of the midnight sun. It can be midnight and you can see the sun in the sky. I went there with my wife to this. I think it's called Tromsø, or one of the cities right in the north of Norway. And you stand in your hotel, you look out of the window, it's midnight, 12 midnight, and you see the sun in the sky. And it feels very bizarre. And I was just thinking, what could be the psychological effect of people living in such a place? Like, it's broad daylight. Anyway, it must have messed them up, I think, personally. Anyway, so they start pouring out of Scandinavia. No one knows really why they started coming out at this point in time in history in the way that they did. There's different theories. Maybe they discovered how to make these longboats, the famous Viking longboats. That's why they suddenly start sailing out everywhere. But a lot of the theories don't add up, so historians are still puzzling over the exact. So it's called one of the genuine great mysteries, is why these Vikings suddenly. But they came out in huge numbers, and it went on for a couple of centuries. There were ships and ships and ships coming out of Scandinavia and going all over Northern Europe. Some of them were going east into what is today Russia. So a group of them actually formed a colony in Russia, and they became known as Rus, and they're mentioned in the Muslim books as the Rus people, and the name Russian comes from Rus. So now historians know that the Russians are actually descended from Vikings as well. Many of them, the favorite place they went was Britain. Yeah. So waves and waves of them were coming over generations, attacking Britain, Scotland, Ireland, colonizing, settling, invading, looting, plundering, everything. Yeah. At one point, the whole of England was ruled by a Viking king for several years. So this is how much they penetrated into Britain. I'm just emphasizing this a little bit because I was speaking to Sidi Zubair earlier in the car, because the history has been distorted. The Western history is distorted. Because the Western history was written in the 19th century when you had the British Empire. And the British, they were trying to portray to the world that they have a great civilization. The British didn't have any history, you see. The British had no history behind them. They've suddenly come out of nowhere. They've got this massive world empire. Even Napoleon, this was one of the things that Napoleon was making fun of the British. He called them a nation of shopkeepers. Yeah? A nation of shopkeepers. Why? Because his point was they've got no history, they've got no culture. Like France was saying, yeah, we were the French, we've got the Roman, we've got all this. You know, the French have always looked down on the British. They've always considered themselves superior culturally. You know, the French cuisine. Look at these British, they eat like potatoes or something. We've got the proper French, you know, snails and things like this to eat. So Napoleon was making fun of the British, but the point was the British, who are these guys? You know, they're shopkeepers, they're just traders. They've just come out of nowhere. Now they've got this massive empire. So British historians, they were making an effort to write this history. So the story was that, you know, where we come from, the Greeks and the Romans. Yeah? The Greeks, the intellect, you know, the science, the philosophy. And then it went to the Romans. The Romans had this great civilization. They believed in law and order. Yeah, the Romans were a little bit oppressive and they weren't perfect, but they were still amazing people. And now the British have come from that tradition, right? So this was a like myth that they were trying to create. So it wasn't very convenient to talk about Vikings and how we've descended from Vikings, right? Because when anyone thinks of Viking, what do you think? Yeah, barbarian, like crazy nutcases. The actual name Viking means pirate. Yeah? So if you read the textbook, even to today, you read the textbook about Vikings. Yeah, Viking Age went on for 250 years. They were coming around, they were raiding, they were looting a little bit. Yeah, I suppose they did occupy a little bit the country as well. But then in 1066, suddenly they all sailed back to Norway and Sweden, and we never heard about them again. And they became peaceful, nice Norwegian people. Yeah, that's an absolute distortion. They didn't go anywhere. They were there, they settled, they stayed, and they are part of the British people. Now, one of the things I argue in my history course is that really the British are not Anglo-Saxon. The British are Vico-Norman. That's what British people are. Because the Normans are directly descended from Vikings. Yeah, that's why they call Normans Northmen. Yeah. So the Vikings that settled in northern France, the region where they settled, it became known as Normandy, the land of the Northmen. And their descendants became known as Normans. Now, like with any barbarian people, what do we say about barbarian people? They assimilate into the higher culture. So the Normans, they rapidly took on the French language, the French religion, Christianity in other words, and they also took titles like Duke, yeah, which was a French nobility. They took these titles, or they got the King of France to give them these titles. So that's when you have people like Duke William, you know, William the Conqueror, right? He's a duke, but he's a descendant from Vikings, right? He's got this title now. He gets the blessing of the Pope and he invades Britain. And that's when you have the Norman invasion of Britain. And what do the Normans do when they come into Britain? They wipe out the Anglo-Saxon leadership, nobility. Completely wipe them out. They take over the whole country and they divide it amongst themselves. Remember we said this was the normal way back in the past. The conquerors would divide up land amongst themselves. And that's exactly what the Normans did. You know? So any Anglo-Saxons that were left were amongst the peasants. You know, and that's when feudalism starts coming about. They becomes enserfed. So the royal family in Britain, until today, they're descended from William. They're Normans, right? But what happened after a few generations? The Normans initially, they were ruling over Britain as French people. They were maintaining their French identity. Yeah, and they were hated by the English people. Because they were literally, Normans were very rough, brutal. They were known for their brutality, you know, similar to the Vikings. And they were hated by the English for several generations. And they would speak French. They didn't associate themselves with the English. But as time went on, you know, they've now settled into this country. And they start losing the land in France as well. So now they realize we need to get ourselves a better image in Britain. So this is when they start trying to now portray themselves as Anglo-Saxon. They start trying to marry into some surviving Anglo-Saxon lineages. They make English the official language rather than French. And so this is now why today, if you ask a normal British, average British people, they think they're Anglo-Saxons, right? We're Anglo-Saxon. Americans, they say they're Anglo-Saxon, right? Because they're descended from the British. They're part of the British Empire. But I believe, in reality, they're Vico-Norman. They're Vico-Norman. So they're not going to like that, but I think that's the reality of it, you know. Let's. Yeah, I think we can leave it there, inshallah. Let's just take questions. How did the Abbasids maintain law and order on a daily basis, e.g., police? Very good question. Yeah, so we talked about police states. You know, we live in the modern world. You step out of line, you're going to feel it. Yeah, but before modern times, by and large, not just Muslim lands but other lands, people policed themselves. You know, people were very autonomous. 90+% of people in pre-modern, pre-industrial times lived in villages, right? So 90% or more of all pre-industrial societies were farmers, you know, and they lived in villages and they farmed the land. Less than 10% of people lived in towns or cities. You know, this is before, say, 200 years ago when the first industrialization starts in Britain. So villages, you don't have policemen, right? You police yourselves. You have your elders. Even in the towns and cities, especially in the early time of Islam, there was no police force or anything like that. People just, communities police themselves, you know? Because you still have communities, you have families, you have, you know, if someone does something wrong, you have a qadi, you know? So every town, not village, but every small town, every large town, city, there'll be more than one, there'll be qadis, yeah? So the qadi is basically the law and order, and he may have, in the larger towns, he may have a few people working for him, you know, to help him. But generally, the people police themselves. As time went on, in some of the larger cities like Damascus, Baghdad, they did develop a system of policing. They were called ahdath. So many of these towns and cities were quite autonomous. You know, they were running themselves in the latter period, you know, after the Abbasid had broken up. So every large town or city would have a rais, like a rais, a leader. What would you call it nowadays? Like a governor or something. And they would have a qadi. And sometimes the qadi and the rais would be the same person, sometimes different people. And sometimes they would have these ahdath, you know, some special people for policing. But that arose a little bit later. In the early period, it was more communities were just policing themselves. But even when you had these sort of ahdath, it was nowhere, nothing like these sort of police states we have now, you know. Communities were very sort of independent and policed themselves.